Okay, there's the topic. In the election of 1968, Republicans nominated Richard M. Nixon and Spiro Agnew. So Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew. And the Democrats, they're forced to nominate Hubert Humphrey. Why are they forced to nominate Hubert Humphrey? Because RFK was killed. He was assassinated back in the Ambassador Hotel in LA. So Nixon is going to win this pretty easily because RFK was a far more popular president than Hubert Humphrey was going to be. And so Nixon runs against Hubert Humphrey in this election. Okay, here he is winning pretty handily. So the electoral vote, it's pretty obvious, but when you're looking at the popular vote, it's not as obvious. It's closer than you might expect, but it's still a 0.8% difference, so still a big enough difference. Making Richard Milhouse Nixon the 37th President of the United States, serving from 1968 to 1974. Which means how many terms did he run for president? How many times did he run for president? Twice. How many years did he serve? 6 terms, which means what happened? What happened? He resigned. He's the only president ever to resign from office. So there you go, folks. Nixon resigning from office. Ready? And go. So Nixon inherits a very unpopular war. Let me pull this back. Nixon inherits a very unpopular war. Why might this war be very unpopular? For example, this image here. Why might this war be very unpopular? Yeah, Cordell. The Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive made the American people feel like what? The Vietnam War was? It was unwinnable. And so the American people already were not supporting this war. Another reason why Americans were not happy with this war is that we were concerned about the loss of lives. And in particular, whose lives were we concerned about? The troops. We felt that too many lives were being lost. We felt that too many young kids were being killed. And so we opposed the war for that sense. The other argument is that, you know what? We're spending all this money on the war. We're wasting all this money on the war, and instead we should be spending it on what? Education, social programs. So again, there's an argument that we were wasting money on the war. And lastly, there was an accusation that maybe this war was caused for profit. This war was caused for profit. That businesses could make money, and therefore we intentionally caused this war. Now, that accusation was already made previously to another war. The accusation that this war was caused so that businesses could profit. Which war was accused of being a war-profit war? Or for-profit war? You guys remember which war was accused of being for-profit? They said, we don't want to fight any other wars because the last war was caused so that arms manufacturers could profit. Which war was that? The Great War, World War What? It was about World War What? Remember the Nye Committee? The Nye Committee said that the war was caused by businesses and to profit. So again, there's an accusation, and so is there a fear that maybe today's war is the exact same way? That we're just fighting the war for oil, we're fighting the war for profit. In any case, Nixon inherits an unpopular war. Nonetheless, he says, some of you may not like it, but he believed in what was known as the silent majority. And what was the silent majority? He said, you know what? These people may not like it, but what did the silent majority believe? Well, he believed that the silent majority what? Yeah, he believed that the silent majority supported the war. He believed that despite all these protests, the silent majority supported the war. Because let's say 3 million people are out and protesting. What does that mean, though? If 3 million people are out protesting, that still means what? That like 200 million are not out protesting, which means the majority of Americans, they what? They support the war, or at least they're not angry enough about it to go out and protest. So he says, you people that are angry, you guys are the minority. Get a job. I'm trying to fight a war, and the majority of us, we're okay with the war. We know what we're fighting for. So is Nixon, does he feel compelled to listen to all the protests? No, because he feels that most of America is what? In favor, on his side. He feels like the people that are silent, they're the ones in favor of this war. They are the ones, who believe that this war is necessary. So he says, you know what, I'm not going to change this war because the people support it. They're just silent about it. I'm not going to bow down to the angry critics. Still, Nixon feels that he needs to address the issue of Vietnam. And he says that he has a plan for Vietnam in his election. So when he is elected, Nixon issues what becomes known as the Nixon Doctrine. And the basic idea of the Nixon Doctrine, we'll talk about Vietnamization in just a sec. The basic idea behind the Nixon Doctrine was that countries would have to fight their own wars. The idea behind the Nixon Doctrine is that countries would have to fight their own wars. Countries would have to fight their own wars without American troops. Countries would have to fight their own wars without American troops. But we would provide military and financial support. But we would continue to provide military and financial support. We would continue to provide military and financial support. The basic idea is what? What don't we want to do anymore? Yeah, lose more lives. Do we want to keep sending our troops to fight their wars? No. And so in Vietnam, this is known as what? Vietnamization. What does that suggest, folks? If we're going to take the Vietnam War and Vietnamize it, what are we going to do with this war? Who's going to fight it instead? The Vietnamese. Does that make sense, guys? So instead of making the war so American, because aren't there a lot of Americans fighting this war, 500,000 Americans? What we're going to do in Vietnamization is we're going to reduce American troops. We're going to reduce American troops and turn the war over to South Vietnam. So we're going to reduce American troops and turn the war over to the South Vietnamese army. So again, we are going to reduce our troops and turn the war over to the South Vietnamese army. We're going to Vietnamize the army, Vietnamization. We're giving the war to you. We are no longer going to fight this war. We're going to reduce our troops and turn the war over so you can fight. Now, are we still going to help them fight it with weapons and money and whatever else? Sure, but are we going to risk our lives anymore? No, and that's the idea. We're going to continue trying to fight the spread of communism, but we're going to make you do it now. Just like with Greece and Turkey, right? It was the same idea, but we're going to do that in Vietnam as well. Vietnamization. Everyone good so far? Okay. So, by 1969, troops were at 540,000. By 1970, 335,000. 71, 160,000. And by 73, almost all Americans had left Vietnam. So, is that pretty much Vietnamization? As these troops leave, who's having more responsibility? Which Vietnam? South Vietnam is having more responsibility to fight the communists. And these soldiers can finally start going home. But that's Vietnamization. Okay. Now, unfortunately, as things are looking good for Nixon, things start getting really bad in Vietnam. And one of the first major problems that occurs that the American people find out about is something known as the Mylai Massacre. And what happened in the Mylai Massacre is that Lieutenant Calley, this guy right here, he killed over 350 people in the village of Mylai. Just killed them, straight out. Took a machine gun and began shooting them all. He killed 350 people. Again, he was arrested, and he said he was following orders. I did it because they told me to. And so the American people are torn because is this the war that we wanted to fight? Killing 350 civilians? Are these people soldiers that we killed? No, they're men, women, children, elderly. Killed 350 people. And his argument was they were Viet Cong. They were just pretending to be innocent, but now there's no hiding. I killed them because they were going to kill us in the future. So we had to kill them now, and he believed he was following orders. But how do you think the American people responded to this? Were they angry about this? Most definitely. Americans protested. The Americans protested, while other Americans supported Calley. They said, no, he was doing what was it? He was just trying to protect his fellow soldiers. So how is the Vietnam War affecting American society here? It's dividing them. There are some that believe that the Mylai Massacre was a massacre, and there are others that believe that Calley was just trying to protect his fellow soldiers, that these people, might they be communists and kill their friends? He says, I was doing what I thought was right. I was just following orders. But again, this becomes a problem for a lot of people. Then you have the secret bombing of Cambodia. And again, as we go through this, think about how the Vietnam War is affecting political, economic, and social. So the war currently is being fought in what country that we were talking about? Vietnam. So then we start bombing Cambodia. Is Cambodia in Vietnam? No, it's not. And yet we began to bomb it anyway. And so here's what happened. We began the secret bombing of Cambodia to destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You guys remember the Ho Chi Minh Trail? Who can tell me what the Ho Chi Minh Trail is? What was the Ho Chi Minh Trail? Correct. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was when North Vietnam supplied the Viet Cong, right? Now here's why we had to bomb Cambodia. Here's North Vietnam and here's South Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail did not go straight directly to South Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was smart, and it went, here's Cambodia, and went out into Cambodia and then back into South Vietnam. Does that make sense? And so in order to effectively destroy the Ho Chi Minh Trail, could we just continue fighting in only Vietnam? No, we had to expand into Cambodia. And so Nixon said, you know what, we got to bomb Cambodia. And he believed he could do that because of what? He believed he had the authority to expand the war into Cambodia because of what? Yeah, what's it called? The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. So Nixon believed he had the power to expand the war because of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. But what did Congress and the American people say about that? Did he have that power? Nope. They said the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution allowed you to have blank check powers where? Vietnam. We didn't say you could go and start bombing Laos and Cambodia. So Congress was pretty upset, as were the American people. So again, Nixon believed he had authority under the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution to expand the war. Congress and the American society disagreed. Why might American society not like the idea of expanding into Cambodia? What might happen? Yeah, more people will have to be sent into the war might expand, more people will be killed, and so they didn't like the idea. So again, how is Vietnam War impacting America again? It's making the president do what? illegal, unconstitutional things. The impact of the Vietnam War, again, is that it's forcing the president to perform illegal or unconstitutional acts. As a result of everything that we've seen, folks, you see the beginning again of anti-war protests. You see further anti-war protests during Nixon's administration. The two most famous happened in 1970, May 1970. The first is the Kent State tragedy, or the Kent State incident. Pretty much these students at Kent State were protesting the Vietnam War as students do. Unfortunately, when they were protesting, the National Guard fired at the students and 4 students were killed. So as these students were protesting at Kent State, the National Guard opened fire and killed 4 students. While many of them were dispersed by tear gas, they fired rubber bullets at them, but 4 students were killed as a result of the Kent State riot by Americans, by American troops. A few days later, there was another riot or incident or protest at Jackson State. And Jackson State protest, 2 students were killed at that protest by the National Guard. So, what is the impact of the Vietnam War on society now? I mean, what's the impact here, folks? People are protesting and, yeah, people were killed at home during a peaceful protest. And many Americans would write, this is the biggest tragedy when these 6 innocent young men were killed during this peaceful strike. And who took offense to that? The idea that this was the biggest tragedy in America when these 6 young men were killed. Who was like, are you kidding me? Who was frustrated with that statement? That this is the worst thing to happen when these 6 young men were killed. Not the Vietnamese. The veterans. The American troops. Like, wait, you're telling me that those 6 people, that's the worst thing that could happen? I'm risking my life every day, and my friends are killed every day. I don't see you crying about them being killed, but you know what? I'm sad that these kids are killed. But why don't you cry for us when we're dying on a daily basis? Where's your emotion? Where's your frustration and anger when we're out with risking our lives every day? So again, this Vietnam War, is it having a toll on American society? There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger going on. And there's more Vietnam War protests, because the question then is, yes, people are being killed, but the question is, who is being killed in this war? And folks, it's not everyone. It's not an equal portion of all of America. You guys know what the largest proportion of people being killed in this war are? Well, let me ask you. Rich or poor Americans? Who's more likely to fight in this war, rich or poor? Poor. Those being killed, folks, were most likely low-income Americans. And one of the major reasons why is, do you know one of the major reasons, one of the major excuses you could use to not go to war? Is that, oh, I can't go to war, I'm what? Not rich or successful. That's not a good enough reason. Not even in charge of a business. I am going to college. Statistically, who is more likely to go to college? High income or low income? High income, right? They have the financial and cultural capital for that. So they say likely that low income families are more likely to go to college. So it's poor kids going off to fight. Secondly, another large group that are going off to fight compared to others, minorities, blacks, Latinos. A much larger proportion of blacks and Latinos are going off to fight in the war than whites. And why might blacks and Latinos, again, have a much higher proportion of going to fight this war? Because at this time, most of them were not, what? Going to college, statistically. And so again, you have poor minorities that are highly represented in the soldiers fighting in this war, and yet rich whites are not typically fighting in this war. And so is that somewhat of a problem, folks? When, young, poor Latinos, blacks, and poor whites, they're fighting a rich man's war? Is that a problem? And so there's a frustration, there's a protest that people are angry about. Why are we even fighting someone else's war? What's in it for me? And one of the biggest complaints about this was from blacks and minorities, arguing, I'm fighting to fight for democracy and freedom for the Vietnamese. Well, why is that such a hypocrisy? Where? Yeah, back at home, I'm not afforded those same rights. So you're telling me I'm going to go ahead and fight this war so they can be free, so they can vote. But on my way back home, you're going to tell me I won't get those same rights? So I'm fighting for them, but I'm not afforded that? Are you freaking kidding me? So is there some frustration there? Most definitely. And it's warranted frustration. They're not getting their just desserts. They're getting screwed. And so they're angry and they're frustrated and they don't like how this is going. They believe that they deserve better rights. So again, the civil rights movement is also part of this. Because many of them are trying to fight to end the war in Vietnam and at home. Because what's the war at home? What war are they talking about back at home? Yeah, the war of segregation, the war of civil rights. So they're going to fight for those as well. Especially for black and Latino Americans. So again, is the Vietnam War having a huge impact on society here? Most definitely. Lots of protests and people are angry. Not to mention the fact, folks, that lots of young kids are being killed. I mean, that's just the most obvious. Many people protested with sit-ins at colleges. But again, here's the irony of sit-ins at colleges. The people that are doing the sit-ins are the kids that did not have to go fight in the war, and now they're in college. It was like, of course you can have a sit-in, because you're not in the war. And so their privilege is ironic. You're ending the war, but you're in college, you don't have to fight. I mean, there's all this hypocritical problems with the sit-in movement, whatever else, the teach-in movements. But in any case, teaching like sit-ins. Like, instead of sitting in and just doing nothing, we would take over a building and we would teach about why the war was wrong. We would teach about what things could be done better. Nixon responded to all these protests and said that the protests were un-American. He said, why are you trying to divide our country? Why can't you just join with the silent majority? Why can't you just agree and conform? By protesting, what are you doing to American society? You're doing what to us? You're dividing us, hurting us, when we should be united against communism. But instead, you're hurting us. You're hurting us big time by dividing us. So again, he's argued that these protests were un-American. Well, in spite of all of this, Congress realizes, you know what, Nixon? No, we're not going to continue. And they repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution for a number of reasons. The first reason we repeal the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, again, this is the resolution that gave the president what? Blank check powers. The first reason why they repeal it is that Nixon what? What did he do that Congress and the American people were not happy about? Yeah, he expanded the war in Cambodia. They are not happy about that. So they repeal the Gulf of Tonkin because they're upset about the secret bombing of Cambodia. That's the first reason why they repeal it. They're upset about the secret bombing of Cambodia. 2, they repeal it because they believe that we're wasting money. That what should we be doing with the money instead? Yeah, social programs, helping the needs of the people. So they believe we were wasting the money. So again, what is the impact of the Vietnam War in this assessment? That the argument economically is that what was the Vietnam War doing? Wasting money. It could have been spent on social programs. Okay, so again, the impact of the Vietnam War is pretty significant here. Then the Pentagon Papers happened, and this really pissed people off. Because the Pentagon Papers were released in 1971. And remember the Gulf of Tonkin resolution? The whole reason why we went to war was that we were attacked by those North Vietnamese boats. The Pentagon Papers revealed that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. Or rather, not never happened, but the Gulf of Tonkin incident was a lie. That we did shoot first. And that's why they shot us. Remember how we talked about we were attacked unprovoked? Well, we actually did attack them first. And so the entire reason why we began this war in the first place, the pretense of sending 500,000 people to war, was what? It was a complete, fabricated, intentional lie to the face of the American people. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was a lie. And how did the American people feel about that? You're telling me the war that we've been fighting for the last 8 years, the whole reason why 50,000 people are dead, was a lie? Are you kidding me? The impact of the Pentagon Papers, folks, is that the American people began to distrust their government. The American people began to distrust their government. And was that because of the Vietnam War? Again, another reason why the Vietnam War is going to impact America. The American people begin to distrust their government. The American people began to distrust their government. That's a problem. And that's because of the Vietnam War. The American people begin to distrust their government. And don't we do that today now, folks? There's a war. Why are we going to war? Oil? Is it oil? Oil is the reason we're going to war? We distrust everything now because they lied openly to us. Vietnam War. Eventually, we signed the Paris Peace Accords and end the war because we don't really want to be in a war anymore. And we tried to achieve what's known as peace with honor. The basic idea of peace with honor is that we will end the war, but not necessarily what? On our side. I mean, as America, we're going to pull out of the war, but we didn't what? No, we didn't lose the war. That's what we wanted. We asked North Vietnam, can we leave the war and just leave you guys to your own devices and your own civil war? And what was North Vietnam's response to that? Yeah, please, get out. Leave the war. Because if we leave the war, what's going to happen? They're going to win. They're clearly going to win. But Henry Kissinger said, no, this is a peace with honor. We're leaving, and we're going to let them fight their own civil war, mano a mano, brother against brother, to let them handle their own differences. And we wanted to feel like we were leaving the right way. Secretary of State Kissinger is the one who helped organize this. In addition, we organized the release of POWs. We organized the release of American POWs. What are POWs? Prisoners of war. And here they are finally coming home, and they're pretty excited about it. Because some of them were in prison for what, like 5 years, 6 years? They was held in prison in Vietnam for 4 or 5 years. And so they're all pretty excited about being able to finally come home after being held prisoner for several years, several months for some of them. And another thing passed then, folks, is the War Powers Act. Were we pretty upset about the secret bombing of Cambodia? Yeah, because he wasn't supposed to be doing that. And so in 1973, Congress passed a law called the War Powers Act of 1973. And what this did is that it limited presidential war powers. It limited presidential war powers and said that the president must ask for Congress's permission, or the president must get Congress's permission the president must ask Congress for permission in order to fight a war for more than 90 days. In order to fight a war longer than 90 days. In order to fight a war longer than 90 days. So if I'm going to fight a war and it's under 90 days, I don't have to get Congress's permission. I can just fight it for 90 days and then 89th day pull out. Okay? But if it's longer than 90 days, do I need Congress's permission? Yes, because that actually might become a bigger war than anticipated. Also, it said that they had to inform Congress within 24 hours. We had to at least let Congress know that we were going to war within 24 hours. 48 hours. We had to inform Congress within 48 hours. But again, what did this do to presidential powers? Limited it. So again, is that an impact of Vietnam? Most definitely. Here's Nixon upset. Imagine Congress trying to curb my right to conduct unconstitutional wars. Why, that's unconstitutional. Because he was doing something unconstitutional by expanding the war, so he's upset that he can't continue to do things unconstitutional, saying that it's unconstitutional. Eventually, South Vietnam will fall. Because who's not there anymore to protect them? America. So by failing to remain in Vietnam, fall of Saigon, South Vietnam will begin in 1975. And this means the failure of what policy? It's the failure of what, folks? Containment. Containment failed. Because Vietnam became fully communist in 1975. It's a failure of containment. We will continue with this lecture on Wednesday, folks. Start working on your charts. You have a DBQ this Friday. It's very likely going to be on the Vietnam War. So start working on your charts there. Have a good day. If you have your homework, turn it in the back. That'd be wonderful.